So another one of the things that you guys bring out about Arminius's thought, and this has actually kind of stirred a conversation among Arminian theologians, is Arminius's reliance upon the doctrine of middle knowledge.
Yeah. Um, did Arminius affirm middle knowledge? Yes. Unequivocally, that's the answer. So I don't know if there are others who would doubt that. They need to read Arminius and see that he did affirm it by name, in fact. So he owned, I don't know if I need to, I'll assume people know what middle knowledge is here just for the sake of the conversation. But it originates, at least most famously, with Luis de Molina in his Concordia, which was published in 1588. Second edition came out in 1595. Arminius owned that edition, the 1595 edition. So he presumably read it. By 1603, in his disputation on the doctrine of God, he defines middle knowledge, uses it, affirms it by name, and does so later in his disputations, including his private disputations later on. Richard Muller has shown that Arminius is already assuming the concept by 1597. So in his correspondence with Junius on the topic of predestination. It's also in the background in his examination of Perkins on predestination. That's basically complete by 1602. So 1603 is when he first uses the terminology. So interestingly enough, Arminius is the first Protestant theologian to use middle knowledge. The only other contender there is Conrad Forstius, who in 1600 uses the terminology. So Forstius uses the terminology before Arminius does, but Arminius is already assuming it by 1597. So yeah, he had the means, that is, he owned the book, and the way he describes it, the texts that he uses, 1 Samuel 23 in particular, classic text. I found that Molina does not use that in his 1588 edition, but he does in the 1595. So there's some evidence there that Arminius was interacting with that edition that he owned and influenced by it. So he uses it. That does not mean that he's, a Molinist in the most robust sense of that term. It doesn't mean he slavishly follows Molina. I don't know if anybody's claiming that. I'm certainly not claiming that. Richard Muller, F. Decker, others who've traced this out also are not claiming that. I've seen or heard of some things where folks are trying to say, look, he's not like Molina on this, or maybe he didn't even understand Molina on this. Okay, that's fine. I don't think you have to agree with every interpretation of Molina. These are some complex issues here. And the Concordia is a very long book. Only part 4 of it has been translated, to my knowledge, and talk about scholastic. Okay, so I've read through all of that, and I don't think Arminius is, claiming to follow all of those things. What he does do, I think, is see it as a very helpful way to reconcile divine foreknowledge and human freedom. That's one of the main going questions of the day. And obviously, it's a relevant question when it comes to predestination, and free will, which is one of the main controversies of his time. The Roman Catholics are going through the same issues, and that's in the Molina's Concordia is part of that. The Lutherans have gone through the same debates, and now the Reformed are going through these same debates. And so all of these people, Roman Catholics are reading others. Lutherans are reading Roman Catholics. Reformed are reading Roman Catholics and Lutherans on these questions, and they're all trying to come up with good ways to think about these issues. So Arminius is one of those who runs across middle knowledge. It's a Jesuit idea. The Dominicans don't like it. He thinks that it's maybe a pretty good thing to pursue. And as he says in 16:3, it can be very useful in many areas of theology. And so it is for him. No, he doesn't use the phrase middle knowledge every time he employs the concept. And that's why, you find it only scarcely used. But that doesn't mean he didn't think it was important. That doesn't mean, so there are complexities to it. He may have waned, back and forth about how helpful it might be in other areas of theology. But, did he at one point in his career and even into the Declaration of Sentiments toward the end of his life think that it was a helpful concept? Absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things that's interesting to me is, let's just say he only uses it 2 times, right? Let's just say he only employed middle knowledge twice. Well, it seems obvious to me that he did want to leave the back door open. No matter who you are, he wanted to leave the back door open to that being a resource for reconciling, like what you said, divine foreknowledge and human freedom. Because I think one of the things that Arminius gets right, but later Arminians still have not gotten right, is he wasn't trying to do away with God's particular sovereignty. Like, he was very much reformed in that sense. He just thought that these things did not conflict necessarily with human freedom. And it seems that for Arminians, they have no problem with saying that God has exhaustive foreknowledge or that God has exhaustive, sovereignty. But as soon as you try to cash that out in a way where it seems like God is proactive in orchestrating the events of history, it's the whole thing of becoming an unwitting determinist, like, oh, if Arminius did do that, he was an unwitting determinist. So where do you think, just off of that thought, where do you think that Arminians, contemporary and, before, have got Arminius wrong in his thought?
Oh, yeah, so that's one of them, is if there are Arminians who would say that he distanced himself from middle knowledge, then that's one of those areas they've gotten wrong, or that middle knowledge somehow leads to determinism. Clearly, that was not Molina's point. They were, in fact, trying to avoid determinism. All of their contemporaries thought the same thing. So if middle knowledge is deterministic in the strict sense, then nobody, Dominicans, Jesuits, Arminians, Reformed, nobody got it right. Yeah, clearly middle knowledge is an attempt to avoid determinism, not to promote it. So if Arminius is a determinist, it's only through a sort of unwitting path that he's articulating a doctrine that he doesn't mean to be, but is unintentionally determinist. So Aef Dekker is a Dutch scholar who argued this, that Arminius, even before he articulates middle knowledge in 1598, Arminius wrote a letter talking about these issues in a very refined way. And Dekker kind of plays it out and says that Arminius' system here leads to determinism. Arminius would deny it, of course, if he were faced with that accusation, but Dekker thinks he has found it. Tom McCall did an essay in a book that I edited and took that on. Basically, I mean, there are a lot of complexities here. I won't go into all the details, but a couple of points. One is it's all based on that 1598 letter that Arminius wrote. It's not even about middle knowledge. Scholars who've investigated this would say middle knowledge is deterministic. The 1598 letter, Arminius, he puts it out as a tentative proposal. So it's not like he's saying, here's exactly what I believe. Another is that you have to leave room for development since then, since 1598. For example, a more developed idea of middle knowledge, perhaps. Other things he said later on that seem to counter what he said in 1598 on this issue. And really just, again, the point was not to be a determinist. I think he was kind of putting an idea out there like we do in a letter sometimes, or a piece of writing, that if we were shown, hey, that ends up saying the exact opposite of what you want to say, then we would be the first to disavow it. So that's all that's at work there.